2. Friday afternoon drinks at Saddlers Creek, and this afternoon we've got with us this lovely group of people. Everyone say hi.
Hi.
And we brought in a couple of guys that know a little bit about wine and a little bit about the Hunter Valley. So if you just want to spin around, Deb, we've got two really lovely gentlemen that have taken some time out of their arvo to come and drink wine and talk wine. We've got Brian McGuigan and Phil Ryan, both Hunter Valley living legends. Thanks, gents, for coming along.
Pleasure.
Pleasure.
So this afternoon, I believe, this afternoon's plan of attack is, well, try some wine, drink some wine,
That's
but
it.
more importantly, I guess shed some light on what makes the Hunter Valley probably the most important wine making and grape growing industry in Australia, because we know that's true. But let's fill in not just these 30 lovely people on why that's fact, but let's tell the whole of the world that, shall we? Sound like a plan?
Yep.
Sounds good.
That's a plan.
Sounds like a plan. All right, well, what I might do is I'll leave the floor to
start.
yourself.
Yep.
I've got a roaming mic, so if ladies and gents, if anyone's got any questions throughout the afternoon, we might do it old school style, just flick your hand up in the air and I'll pop over with the microphone. And if you wanted to ask either of the gents a question about wine or football or anything to that effect, I'm sure we can get there. We've got one very, very proud but broken-hearted South Sydney supporter and a very keen Knights supporter as well. So if you've got any questions or any grief to give them, you can do that as well. So shall we proceed? Gents?
Okay, thanks, Brett. For those who don't know me, I'm Phil Ryan. I've been involved in winemaking for a number of decades, and one of the most fortunate parts of my life now is that I spend a bit of time here with Saddlers Creek, involved in my own family label, and also working with Brett and the team, and Wendy and Frank and Serge that own this business. So I've had many years here, and really it is my second home. I just live across the road, a few hundred metres up. So this is where I come when to avoid doing the washing or mowing the lawn or something. My dear friend Brian here, he's been in the wine industry, I think forever. And Brian we're not only very close friends, but we've worked together now for 4 or 5 decades. So we've had a long association. Those who don't know Brian, I haven't met anybody who doesn't know Brian, but Brian's career started with Penfolds way back in the 60s, is that right? 60s?
60, yes.
So, yeah, 1960. He worked alongside Max Schubert, a fairly important name in the Australian wine business. He was the man who developed Grange, so Brian had a pretty good tutor. Brian and his wonderful wife Faye moved then into their own business called Wyndham Estate, and many would remember that brand, and that was Brian and the McGuigan's family. From there he developed McGuigan Brothers and McGuigan Wines, which became an international business. And he retired. I think he retired. You haven't really retired, have you?
No.
Only a few years ago.
No.
Leaving it in the capable hands of his young brother. Wine isn't the only thing at Hunter that Brian's been involved with. He's been an amazing person, and he's always thought about the well-being of everyone here. He's involved himself for many years in the Hunter Valley Vineyard Association as president in every area you can think of. A.M, legend, those awards go on, but most importantly, from my point of view, and the locals who are involved in viticulture here, as Brian retired, he made it his business to get water into the Hunter Valley. And that's not an easy thing to do, because it doesn't rain here when you want it, and it does rain when you don't. There's no water on tap for vineyards, but Brian instigated 21 years ago now, Brian, 22 years ago, with the help of all the vignerons here. We all had to throw money into the till. He organised a pipeline from the Hunter Valley, Hunter River, which goes right around all the vineyards and the guest houses, etc. in Pecolbin. and that has saved our butt over the last 20 years with irregular rainfall, etc. Now we have assured water, and I know everyone in this valley is very grateful for what Brian instigated, and his contribution will forever be remembered. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Daddy. That was really very nice of you to say all those things. That was really nice, Phil, and I really appreciate those thoughts. Deborah, it's terrific to be here today. You've made the arrangements for us to be here. And to Frank and Wendy in particular, and Serge, it's great to be here. And Brett also, you're going to be the man with the microphone, so that's going to be fun. And it's great to welcome you all to this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and I'd like to join with Phil in saying it's great to have so many people from all over. I know a number of you are from Sydney. Some of you have come all the way from Pacolban to be here with us. But there's one lady down right there, right in front of me. She's come, ladies and gentlemen, she's come all the way from Texas to be with us today. I think that's worth a hand. She's heard that you were performing today, Phil. She's heard about you from your time in America, and so she wanted to see you in action. Isn't that good? But look, we all want to be in action here today, and what we want to do is to make this as enlightening and as light as we possibly can, and tell you about the history of the place, the wines that we've made, the personalities that have been involved, and there sure have been some personalities.
Yep.
Look at you, Phil. Yeah. All the personalities been involved in the wine industry over the years, and the change that's happened in the wine industry is just incredible, isn't it, since we first joined. Now, you worked for McWilliams for a long time, Phil.
Yep.
How long was that?
48 years with McWilliams. I was lucky to start in when wine wasn't as popular as it is today. Started really in that era, as did Brian, when it was just being discovered, if you like. I was talking with Brian today about how the industry has moved so dramatically in the last 50 years, and we've been lucky to be part of that. When I started in 65, it was a statistical fact that we drank, in terms of table wine consumption, we drank less table wine per head of population in Australia, it was 11 million people then, than tomato sauce. We were drinking far more fortified wine, and it wasn't until 1970 that the two paths crossed, where fortified wine started to ebb and peak and level out, and table wine just started to really explode. So way back then, it was you'd go to someone's home and the tipple would be a sherry or maybe a port or a muscat, and very few people were drinking table wine. So to be involved in those early days was incredible, because we moved from really one style of white wine that was just tank fermented straight in a bottle, to now the complexity of barrel fermented and everything that goes with the new varieties. Chardonnay was a new variety. When I started work and Brian started work, there was no Chardonnay. You could not buy a bottle of Chardonnay anywhere. It was none made in Australia. If you wanted Chardonnay, you bought Burgundy. So it had to be a Polini or a Chassagne or a Meursault, etc., because there was no Chardonnay grown in this country. So it's amazing what's happened in such a short time.
Phil, what we've done today is I went down to Drayton's and bought a couple of bottles of sherry, because this is what people used to drink 60 years ago. Now, it's in the little glass, in the XL. If you have a look at that, that's what we used to drink. And why did we drink that? To understand that, we need to go back to the early days of the wine industry in Australia. And of course, we go back a long, long way until the first vines were planted in the Hunter Valley. They were planted in 1828.
Yeah.
1828. And people then, of course, most of the people who came here who had a bit of money, who were able to buy land or be given a grant of land, and a lot were given grants of land, started mixed farms, because back then they had no idea what to grow here because of the seasonality of the place. They didn't understand that. And so they grew all sorts of things. You know, they had wheat and they had sheep and they had all sorts of crops. But they planted vines so that they had a beverage to consume. And so they had nothing else to consume. There was no way they were going to be able to get any beer from the brewery. So they grew their own grapes to make their own wine. And that was the embryo of the Hunter Valley wine industry. And way back then, a number of people planted, and lots of those people, of course, came, planted, and went, because the industry, like the rest of life, changes. And so we went through a period of expansion when wine was sold. This sort of wine was sold. Very little table wine was sold. But this sort of wine was sold because the only way blokes could get a drink after work was to go down to the wine shop and get what was called a fourpenny dark. When Phil came along and had his first fourpenny dark, it cost him 1 and 6. So that's how inflation's taken place. But this is what they used to drink: port, sherry and muscat. And so, and it was the only sort of wine that they would make, because they didn't have the technology, they didn't have the capacity to stop oxidation and what have you. And so wine was sold, and I can remember when I started in the wine industry, we used to fill up these demijohns that hold 5 or 10 gallons in those days, and you'd put a seal on the top, then you'd stamp it, and then that'd be put on the train, and the wine would be taken to all over New South Wales, to Sydney, to everywhere. And that's how we sold our wine way back then. But things then changed, and this country opened up after the Robertson land grant of 1874.
Was it?
Yeah, it's 1874. Check your history book, 1874. And so lots of land was then offered to free settlers. And so people came in and they saw the grapes were going pretty well, so they planted up vineyard. And that's when families such as the Draytons and the Tyrrells and Tullocks all started off. And they then made fortified wine. They all had their own distilleries, because when you make fortified wine, as you probably know, you have to literally fortify it by putting spirit into the fermentation and stopping the fermentation, because spirit in the middle of a fermentation kills all the yeast and then keeps the sugar that you see that's in that XL wine glass. And so then Australia went through some bad times. 1893 was a terrible time. The bank crash, then World War I, then the Depression,
World War II.
then World War II. And it wasn't until after World War II did the government of the day decide that we should have more people here. I remember when I was in 6th class, Bill, there were only 7 million people in Australia. That was in 1949. There were only 7 million people in this country. And we didn't drink any table wine, as you've said, or very little table wine. Did you say we ate more tomato sauce than we drank table wine?
Yep.
Or you did that, or you did it earlier.
Yeah.
But after World War II, as you remember, we had lots of people coming to this country from Central Europe, from the Mediterranean, and those people changed, ladies and gentlemen, the eating habits of Australia in the first place. I mean, who's been to the greasy Greeks? I mean, the Greeks were the first people to offer food to Australians in a different way. And then we had the Italians and all these people came here. But they then said to the wine companies, hey, we can't drink this stuff with our beautiful food and all this grease we've got in our food. We need something to cut through it. We need table wine. And so the wine industry said, yes, we understand, because the wine industry understood what was happening around the rest of the world. And that's when we started with Semillon, which back then was called Hunter River Riesling, and should have been still called that because we invented the variety. And of course Rhine Riesling. Now Rhine Riesling, those of you who are old enough, and there aren't any here, but those who are old enough will remember Wolfie Blass and Rhine Riesling, because he made a delicious, refreshing white wine that you could chill, and it was so good to drink. And of course he put a little bit of sugar in it too. Not sugar, but kept the grape sugar, stopped the fermentation, because the fermentation starts off with that amount of sugar and gradually comes down when you're making dry wine, comes down till eventually you end up with no sugar, and during that time it's forming alcohol. But he'd stop it just before it got to dry. Dry meaning devoid of sugar. And so he'd stop it there, and of course people loved it. And from there a revolution occurred. Pick up, my friend. Do you think a revolution occurred?
Yeah, I think the revolution should start with a glass of wine.
Oh, good.
And we're going to start on the template you have in front of you. There are 3 whites at the back, and the first one, as Brian indicated, mentioned the word Semillon, and that is what used to be known as Hunter River Riesling. And Semillon, for those who, if you come to the Hunter, that's, if you like, that is the variety that we like to promote so much, because it's the variety that made the Hunter Valley what it is today. The first Semillon was planted in 1828, unquestionably. We think in those early years, there was no grape variety common to Australia, so they've got to be brought here. So in the during those late 1700s, early 1800s, the vines had to come from somewhere, and it was the first fleet actually who came into Farm Cove in 1778, brought vine cuttings with them from both Rio and also from Constantia, or South Africa. The South Africans had already been making wine for about over 200 years before Australia started. So Semillon, we believe, was sourced there. Semillon comes from Bordeaux. Its natural home is Bordeaux, but it also had a circuitous route. It was planted in many other countries because it is such a good variety to grow. Unoaked, and that's how we drank our wine for the next 150 years. The wine is made, it is simply grown, picked, crushed, the juice is extracted, juice is settled, fermented, and it's fairly low in alcohol compared to some of the wines as we go further along. So this particular Semillon comes from a vineyard called Tinkler, which is just on the mountain range below that, and the actual vineyard site of his Semillon is down in a gully. It's quite an old creek profile, and that's where the lightest soil is. Brian's brought along some soil samples, which I'll get him to talk about later, but the soil for Semillon is very light, it's quite acidic, it's minerally, talky, stony, yeah. All those sorts of things. Gravelly. Yeah. So it's not big, gutsy soil where you might want to grow heavy crops. We use that soil for Shiraz or Cabernet or Pinot Noir. But for Semillon, you want lightness because it then translates into the wine, the finished wine. So if you look at that wine now, it's 4 years old. It went straight from fermentation. The wine was stabilised and into bottle. So this was bottled quite early, about May-ish of, that right, Brian? That's right, isn't it, Brett? Yep. About May of 2016. And it's going through now its metamorphosis of bottle age. Semillon has this amazing capacity to mature in bottle. It goes from its primary fruit, lemon, lime, grapefruit, all those lovely citrus characters which are so refreshing with oysters and all that sort of thing when they're young. It then starts to develop with maturity into the nuts, the lanolin, the toast, and it's like honeyness, but still some lemon lime acid there, which gives it that support and the length of flavour. But these wines will live in bottle for decades, and we've both seen wines going back many, many decades. I've got the oldest Semillon in my cellar is a 1943, and it's in a those vineyards, what we call them, and I don't know when we're going to open up. I want to open up on the last day, and I've got to find out when the last day is. But that's what's that, 70, 80 years of age.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And maybe it's failed, but these wines have the potential to mature for many, many years. So people sometimes say, oh, it's a bit old, it's 5 or 6 years of age. It's just starting its journey. And Semillons are a joy to have in their youth. And also you can watch, so if you buy a dozen of young Semillon, it's wonderful to watch it over a period of 5 or 6 years and see how it grows and matures.
It becomes unrecognisable, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is, you're saying, it's just going through that change.
Yep.
And I agree with you, it's just starting to become nutty.
Nutty, yeah. And that lanolin character and that the palate is almost, there's a richness there, and it gives the impression of a slight sweetness, but there's no sugar in that at all. That is bone dry, fermented right out to dryness. And this variety goes through that process in bottle. It virtually enriches itself. It pulls in whatever's in Semillon as a grape, translated into a wine. As it matures in bottle, it gets riper and richer on the palate. And that's the, if you like, the life process that this variety has.
That raises another point, Phil, and that is that that's what it does here.
Yep.
Wouldn't you agree?
Yep.
But it doesn't do the same thing in bloody the Barossa Valley or the Murray. Why is it that Semillon actually does that here?
Yeah.
And why is it that the Hunter Valley is so good for growing Semillon and Shiraz, to a lesser degree Pinot Noir?
Yeah. Well, going way, way back again to those first early settlers, they brought out cuttings, or access cuttings from, it was through that great man MacArthur and Busby and all these wonderful names. They, MacArthur actually, during the Napoleonic Wars, back in 1812, 1813, he left Australia, went back to France and Italy to get grape cuttings. Now, he would have been probably in an area where there was musket fire or cannon fire, picking up cuttings. Brave man, he brought these material back, and they slowly evaluated over a period of years what will work best. And the Hunter, being the first and the oldest viticultural area, had opportunity to trial just about everything that was available in France, in Spain, in Italy, etc. in those years, and Germany. And the two varieties which seemed to be most successful in Australia at that time was Semillon and Riesling. In the Hunter, because of the word terroir, we have a climate unique to the world's wine industry. We're not maritime, but we're not that far away, so we do get the influence from the ocean. We get the influence from the north, from, if you like, the tropical influence. We also get what we call the Mediterranean influence coming up from the Great Divide, from South Australia. So
I'm going to interrupt you and say, why is it then that South Australia does so well with Rhine Riesling?
That's that for whatever reason that they get that cold climate out of up through Eden Valley and the Clare, which we don't get. We don't get the cold winters and the very cool springs. Their soil is different. We have this sandy alluvial soil, light silty clayey soils, and we have more warmth in the summertime. We tend to have summer rainfall, which can be a pain in the butt, as against winter rainfall of those areas. So the climate is entirely different.
Why is it a pain in the butt? Why is it a pain in the butt when we get the rain in January, February?
It's a little, like if you grow, you no doubt many of you have little gardens at home and you grow all sorts of things. If it rains too much, you lose the garden. We've got big gardens out there, and if we get a lot of rain in February, March, then it's a big threat to the... But we won't talk about negativities, because even in the wet years, I was told in France that, and I worked over there, that in France all vintages are good, but some are very good and some are very, very good. I said to the guy I was working for over there, in the Hunter Valley, all vintages are challenging. Some are character building, and the rest leave you needing therapy. So, because we have these wet weather influence, but still at the same time, Semillon is the variety, and Chardonnay and Verdelho that do suit this area so well.
And so the next wine that people might like to try now has got more body. It's broader. It's more of a mouth-filling wine.
Yep.
And that is Sadler's Creek Verdelho. Tell us about Verdelho. Verdelho is a relatively popular variety and is more recent than Semillon or Chardonnay, wouldn't you say?
No, I've got looking back on the old planting records. Verdelho comes from the island of Madeira. It is the principal variety in have some Madeira. And in those early 1800s, there's a record show that 1824 we were growing Verdelho in Australia.
Now, was that because...
And it was called Madeira.
Was called Madeira?
Yep.
And was called Madeira because some of the sailing ships used a provision in Madeira, didn't they?
Yep.
And they brought some cuttings with them.
Yep. Yeah. And Madeira used to enjoy being in barrel and going through the tropics, and it would advance and show more character and more maturity. In Australia now, it's become a very important variety, both in the Hunter Valley, over in Western Australia as well, and it produces not only the very full-flavoured style of white wine, but you can also make beautiful mature age Verdelhos as a fortified wine. Brett, you might like to talk about the Verdelho and make a comment there on the winemaking.
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt
that
you.
Microphone on? Sounds like it.
Yep.
Sorry, you caught me with the mouth
that's
half
why I
full of
did
food,
it. You were munching.
But that's all right. Yeah, so Verdelho's it's a wine style that, Brian's right, it is very popular, but unfortunately in the marketplace, as in the broader market outside of the Hunter Valley, most people wouldn't see a lot of it in the bottle shops because there's not a huge amount of it grown in other areas, and it gets dominated by varieties like Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot Gris as extremely popular now. But I find this wine is a perfect veranda style wine. It's really fruit driven, it's very aromatic, it's very easy to drink, but it can also be slightly textural. The winemaking process for this is quite similar to Semillon, in the fact that we treat it relatively delicately. We harvest the fruit, try and keep it nice and cool, press it very lightly, ferment it in tank, doesn't see any oak influence, and then post stabilisation into bottles. So it's not a style of wine that we would put to timber, unlike those fortified styles of wines that the gents were talking about out of Madeira. It is a nice, fresh, fruit-driven, forward drinking style of wine. Now, compared to that very first wine that we looked at, the Ryan's Reserve Semillon, which is 4 years old, I would be suggesting that if you have any Verdelho hanging around in your cellar that's 4 years old, you probably should have drank it 2 years ago. Because it tends to not age as gracefully, even though the acidity can be up there and the pH can be quite low. So for those sort of science winey nerds out there that like to think about those sorts of things, it naturally has that high acidity in this instance of this style of wine, but it will start to go a little bit fatter and broader, whereas Semillon will definitely age quite gracefully. So my suggestion would be, with your Verdelho, drink it in that first couple of years. Of course, there will be exceptions to the rule, so you don't have to, but I enjoy these styles of wines when they're really fresh and
Brett,
fragrant.
isn't it the case that Verdelho sort of doesn't get any better than when it's young and fresh and fruity,
exactly,
and mouth-filling? With Semillon, you have a very attractive wine when it's young, but quite thin, and sometimes quite acid. But it then develops into what Phil has described to you. And Rhine Riesling similarly. Rhine Riesling goes through a metamorphosis and goes from a lovely, refreshing white wine, and then actually gets some, I call it, kerosene characters as it matures.
Yeah, it doesn't sound attractive, but it tastes darn good. That's for sure.
It tastes darn good, and it's interesting. But Verdelho is one of those varieties that you drink when it's young, fresh, mouth-filling, as you said.
Of course, yeah. With Verdelho as a winemaking or I guess a sales style of wine, you really want to have it all sold before you pick the next year's worth of grapes, because we want it fresh and fruit driven, and we want it to be refreshing. It's not something that's really going to get any better. That's what Semillon or Riesling's for.
That's right. But that's what we want as consumers. I mean, we want refreshing, lovely, flavoursome food, and we want the same in the beverage that accompanies that food.
For sure. So Verdelho, fruit salad in a bottle, in a nutshell, is what that wine's all about.
Yes. Now, the next wine is Phil's wine, and I'd like to ask him, did he pee in the glass or something here?
If you look, this is...
Philly, what did you do with this one?
Well, this is a sample out of barrel. So this is going into bottle very soon. And it looks cloudy because we purposely, it's Chardonnay. And you think about Chardonnay, 1974 was the first commercial Chardonnay released into Australia. We've been drinking Semillon and Riesling for 150 years. We had to wait till 1974 to get Chardonnay. And it took took Australia by storm. And very soon after that, massive plantings went into place. It changed the whole face of the Australian wine business. This is the most important white variety in the Australian context. You think tons of grapes, more than 400,000 tonnes of Chardonnay are grown in Australia. In every viticultural region of Australia,
out of how many, Phil? 400,000 tonnes of Chardonnay.
Yep.
What's our total crop?
1.8 million.
1.8 million.
Yeah,
so 400 of 1.8 million.
There's a lot of there. So that's how important this variety is. And when we started making the wine, we knew we wanted to make barrel for the first white wine that goes through barrel. It was going to be matured in barrel, fermented in barrel, etc. And we probably moved the needle too far in those early years, because I used to go to wine shows, and what we were judging in those days was the oak rather than the fruit in the wine. So the more oak, it seemed to be better. But the Europeans told us, in no uncertain terms, that we were missing the direction. But very soon after that, by the early 80s, we had a good grip on how good this variety can be grown in all those viticultural areas.
So Phil, excuse me butting in. But
I'm used to it.
You're used to it. I know your wife's been going at you for years. The two wines that we've got first, the Verdelho and your Semillon, made in stainless steel, right?
Yep.
Why the hell do we use, why did you put this in wood?
In oak.
And how does it make the wine more complex?
Yep. Well, in oak, what do we do with this wine? And Brett's the custodian of that. These grapes are grown in our little vineyard just up the road. It's called Stephanie, which is my youngest daughter, because she planted the vineyard begrudgingly in 1988. And her sister, later Vanessa, she helped plant the vineyard as well in 1988. They still have the scars, they say, from that experience. But we use oak because of the importance of getting complexity. Oak is not the flavour we're looking for per se. We're looking for the complexity that French oak, which is what we use. It's more cashewy sort of oak, cedary oak, not the American oak, the big grunty stuff. We use older oak as well. We don't use much new oak, because what we want to do is let the wine age in the barrel for 6 or 7 months. And during that time, Brett and his team, you can see how cloudy that is. He keeps that wine cloudy. And if you serve that to a customer, they obviously reject it because it looks like it's out of condition. But that has been sitting on its lees. So when the wine finishes fermenting, there's all these dead yeast cells end up in the bottom of the barrel.
Is that what you call lees?
Lees.
Lees. How do you spell that?
L-E-E-S.
Right.
And that then is brought back into solution with a process called batonnage. And that adds creaminess to the wine. It adds texture, it adds flavour weight, and it adds this lovely softness and creaminess to the wine. So as those cells decay, they release their own flavour. What will happen to that wine next is it'll be going into stainless steel. It'll then be clarified, cold stabilised, very cold, and then it goes in from there straight in a bottle. So that will be coming on release later this year.
You see, ladies and gentlemen, winemakers are a bit like artists in that they get a parchment and then they have to make changes and adjustments to make a particular style that they think is going to appeal to you, the consumer. Because after all, we're in the business of winemaking to sell the wine to someone. So what we've got to do is to make sure we hit the nail on the head and determine exactly what people want and work out a way to do that. So with the Semillon, you've done nothing to that other than maybe a little wood.
No oak at all.
No oak at all.
Just straight.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
No oak in this one?
That's right.
But in this one, oak to actually give another character. So the parchment can be changed by leaving a little sugar, that's grape sugar, in the wine, which introduces another complexity, or giving it a more savoury character. And I think wood is savoury by leaving it in wood for a time, because it changes that fruitiness into something that's more savoury and quite different and interesting, and quite a contrast with Semillon or Verdelho or Rhine Riesling.
Yeah. It's so popular when Australia came so late into Chardonnay. The export market is massive to Australia. Without the export market, the wine industry turns off. We crush, 1.8 million tonnes. That equates to, nearly over about 1 billion litres of wine, isn't it? Something. That's right. It's a massive amount of wine. Yeah. More than about 60% we export. And it's in export terms, when I started with the company back in '65, Australia was selling 8 million litres of wine in export. Now we're selling 800 million litres or more of wine overseas. And there's a lovely thing came in from the export department recently. It equated to what's happening and the importance of Australian wine to the wine industry, to the wine business, in that there are over 3 million bottles of Australian wine consumed every day of the year in over 100 countries of the world. So that is a massive statement for the quality of Australian wine. And Chardonnay was really the flag bearer back in the 80s that opened up that export market. When it hit the UK market, which is arguably our most important market for bottled wine, they were comparing Australian Chardonnay to Californian Chardonnay, they were comparing it to Burgundy, and the Australian descriptor became, in the UK, sunshine in a glass. How lovely that is to have a name like that, sunshine in a glass, and that carried us through decade after decade of producing wine with fruit, but with structure, still traditional winemaking, as of Burgundy, which we've copied and emulated, but we're using Australian fruit to get that lovely richness, the melon, the peach, and that lovely zingy grapefruit acid.
Yes. Can I brag?
Yeah, go.
Okay. I'd just like to tell you that my old company, McGuigan, exports currently 14 million dozen boxes of wine, of Chardonnay basically, but the biggest product is our Shiraz to the UK and to Ireland a year. 14 million boxes. So approximately 70% of our whole wine production goes to those two countries, believe it or not.
Yep. And it's about costs of overheads, and being able to have a market like that, we can obviously expand and make our businesses more profitable.
And Philly,
make them workable.
There's some new whites coming.
Oh, well,
New whites coming.
yeah, the big deal...
We need them, don't we?
Yeah, the big deal
To
now
interest
in
people.
Australia is what we call textural dry whites. They're unoaked dry whites, so you think about... Brian has a Gruner Veltliner, think about Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio, Anise, Fiano, things like Trebbiano. There's a massive range of Mediterranean white varieties now which are exploding in Australia, because in the past, when we first got started, these varieties weren't available and they were unknown to the consumers of the day. But now with our people are international travels, you know, people no doubt in this room have spent time in Italy and Spain, in South America, and they see these wines, and Portugal as well, where these newer varieties, so they're not new to them, they've been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, but they're new to Australia. So these now are coming into the country. Brian grows Gruner Veltliner and Vermentino, don't you?
Yeah,
and Pinot Gris.
And this here is my daughter's wine,
Yep.
and it's Pinot Gris, isn't it? Yeah.
So for
Pinot
the benefit
Gris.
of the room, you have a 7th glass that'll be next to your sheet. It's the ring-in glass for the ring-in wines. So Brian was nice enough to bring along with himself this afternoon a collection of either alternate varietals from the Hunter Valley or from other regions for us to explore in where the wine industry is going, not just varietal-wise, but also in this region. So the first wine that you have in the glass is the Lisa McGuigan Pinot Gris. And then once you've tried that wine, I'll go and grab the Gruner Veltliner and pour that for you as well. So, Brian, tell us a little bit about Lisa's Pinot Gris.
Well, this particular juice is from orange because it needs a bit of a cooler climate. But nevertheless, it's a variety that's beginning to get some following in the marketplace. Gruner Veltliner, of course, comes from Austria, and we brought the cuttings in through an agent, and we've planted it up, and we've got quite a bit of it now because we think it's very interesting. You see, Australia doesn't have, ladies and gentlemen, any of its own varieties. Australia, when the English arrived here, didn't have any grapevines. So all the grapevines in this country all needed to be imported. So the varieties have come from all over the world. So there aren't any natural varieties here. And the same is the case with Gruner Veltliner. And that is why we should try these things, because, you know, wine is a product of image and of fashion. And you might remember back over the years, I mean, we loved our Rhine Rieslings, we loved our Cabernets, but where are those things today? They've been passed by, in the first place, what you said, Chardonnay, but then, of course, all our whites were surpassed by the New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. So what we need to do now is to introduce a new style that will take over from where Sauvignon Blanc hopefully will leave off as quickly as possible, and we get these bloody New Zealanders back to bloody New Zealand. And so this is why we are trying other varieties, and of course then the winemaker has got to play with them to make sure that he can make a style from that variety and grow it in a region that's going to have the features that Phil's been particularly talking about the hunter and what styles we make. So it may take us a while to work out the best way of doing these things. But that's why we try these things, because you never know what happens. And in a commercial business, you must make sure you're out there leading, not following because someone else has stolen the majority of the business. So that's the Pinot Gris. Now, what's happening with, are we having the Gruner Veltliner?
So, Brian, the glass that was already poured for the ladies and gents was the Pinot Gris, and I've just poured the Gruner for everybody except you two gents and these lovely people down here. So if you could do me a favour and vacate a glass. Could I have that other bottle, please, Deb?
Now, Gruner Veltliner is a bit interesting. It's a bit hard to remember the name, but it'll get abbreviated probably to Gruner. But it is an interesting variety because it's just all flavour and I think quite rewarding.
Yeah. Has anybody here done the river cruise from Amsterdam to Budapest at all? No? It's well worth doing.
Thank you.
The joy for myself being in the wine business was as you work your way down, there's 15 stops from memory, and you work your way from Amsterdam and very soon you're into Germany, and so you're drinking Riesling because each stop they bring on board the wines, the local wines of the area. Then as you get down to Austria as they call it, suddenly it's Gruner Veltliner, and I call it Lina, you call it Liner, it doesn't matter. So you see then what each district and each terroir as you go down that river produces. It's quite an interesting process. And we're going on to Shiraz in a minute, and I'd just like to make a very important comment. Brian and his lovely wife Faye and my lovely wife and I, we went last year along the Rhone. We did the Rhone River Cruise. We were called the Rhone Rangers, and we travelled from the Mediterranean right up to Lyon, and we were looking at Shiraz, however you like to call it. And one of the most remarkable experiences of my life, and I'm sure of Brian's life, we went to the tabernacle, if you like, of Shiraz, where it first came from, a little place called Tain-le-Hermitage near Tournon, and we were guests of Chapoutier for the morning. And there we were fortunate with their winemaker. We had his ear and his wines for quite a few hours, and it was a remarkable experience to tell him, to explain to us how he sees hermitage, as they call it, how it's produced and the styles, etc. And it was lovely for us to, as we finished, to say, well, when you come to Australia, you will be able to see what you call hermitage, we call Shiraz, vines that are older than any of your vineyard here in France. And,
why is that, Phil?
And just up the road, a little place called Mount Pleasant, they have vineyards there that date back to 1880.
1880, and what happened to the Europeans?
The Europeans, around about 1890, around about 1890 to 1900, they were infected or infested with a little mite called vineyards out. So they had to start again from scratch. Through France, particularly France, was hammered. And so the oldest vines there would be the early 1900s.
I'm sad. I'm so sad for the French.
I feel for them, all that history.
They're such a lovely lot, aren't they?
But so that's a lovely thing to keep in the back of your mind, that Australia now is a repository of the oldest Shiraz vines of the world. And they're right here in the Hunter Valley. That's where they are.
God's own country, Phil.
That's it.
I wonder, before we go on to the reds though, Phil, whether we can't ask our guests about the white wines. They've had about, I don't know, 6 or 8, I don't know how many. But I wonder, could we ask the lady from Texas? She's come so far, and it's bloody dry in Texas. And they slow their words a bit in Texas. It's where, what was his name?
Not down south, it's not dry.
Huh?
Not dry down south.
Down south it's not dry, no.
We don't
So,
slur
would
our
you
words.
like to tell us...
We speak slowly.
Yeah, like JR?
Absolutely like JR, yes, sir.
Yeah. Could you tell us what you think of these wines? How long have you been in Australia?
14 years.
40?
14.
Oh,
14.
14.
Not that old.
Okay. No, you wouldn't be 40.
Oh, yes, sir, I'm over 40.
You're over 40. I don't believe it. Anyway,
40 in 1 month,
apart from
right?
all that, can you give us a few comments on the white wines? Because you're sort of fresh to these wines, being just having arrived. Mm-hmm. What do you think? You're going to give us a few comments.
I actually really love the Simeon. I don't normally like Simeons. This one is particularly a good one.
See, because it's aged now, and it has that feature that you like. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what did you think of the Verdelho?
I like the Verdelho as well.
Okay. And what did you think of the Chardonnay?
Thought the Chardonnay was excellent.
Well,
in fact, I actually moved down here because of a McGuigan Chardonnay.
Moved all the way to Australia for a bottle of Chardonnay.
Would you
Straight to
please?
Brian's heart.
Would you please repeat that?
It was a 2000 Chardonnay, and if you happen to have any of those left, I'll buy every one of them.
Truly.
Truly.
And where did you buy that? In Texas?
No, I bought it at the winery.
Oh, you bought it at the winery.
Mm.
Oh, this is something we've got to talk about. This is unbelievable. But so you liked all the whites, but
did.
particularly you liked Phil's 16 wine.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
That was very
So
good.
you
Very
like
lovely.
something like Phil with a bit of age on.
I like a bit of age, yes.
Yeah, a bit of age. That's good.
Yeah,
Now, what about someone else? Thank you for that. That's lovely. So what about one of these gentlemen here? What do you think, Brett? What about the gentleman who's smiling at us? What do you think so?
Sucked in. My favourite, I enjoy a Shiraz the best, but for white wines, I'm certainly interested in Chardonnays. My wife and the table behind me are particularly Chardonnay connoisseurs, shall we say.
All their glasses are empty.
But the Chardonnay that they like is a buttered Chardonnay, a very oaky Chardonnay.
Yes.
Now, over the last couple of years, Chardonnay seems to have changed.
Correct.
Exactly.
And how
Correct.
can it change if...
Because
if
we
Chardonnay-
follow what people tell us,
Ah.
and people say to me all the time, you've had all these products that have sold very well. How do you do the market research? Because, you know, you've got to hit the nail on the head and get it exactly right for people. You know, why do they buy Smith's crisps instead of other people's crisps? They buy them because they like them, because they got a certain taste. Now, it's the same when you're making wine. You have got to make it so that you know that people are going to buy it. How do you learn that? Oh, you send a great deal of people out into the public, and you then get the information back and sift through it. Bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. You don't do that at all. What you do is, day upon day, have wine tastings in liquor stores and let the people tell you. Because they tell you what they like. They don't know that they're telling you, but they tell you how to technically change the wine to appeal to them. And that's how you do it.
Yep.
And people think you spend millions, Phil,
No,
doing this, but you don't do that at all.
That comment you made about Chardonnay being big and buttery and full-bodied, and we used to make them that way purposely. We'd pick them riper. We'd leave them on skins to get skin contact.
And the bigger the better.
And we'd barrel ferment them in new oak. And Australian wine in the Australian Chardonnay of that era were called Dolly Parton wines. I don't quite understand the connection. We were looking for big, full-bodied Chardonnays.
Gradually that'll come to you. As you get a bit older, you'll understand that.
And that was the warning sign. But there are two, as Brian said, it's a big market. And I like Brian more than me, but I have done a lot of tastings in bottle shops in my day. And you meet people who still want that big buttery style. They determine that's what they want to drink. But we've moved seismically, really, into a Chardonnay style which is finer, more delicate, leaner, and it competes then really what the majority of wine consumers are looking for.
That's absolutely
and if
right.
if you want to that bigger, fuller style, then buy that sort of wine as a young wine, the Stephanie, and just leave it in your cellar. It will develop and rich. And I've got that wine going back since we started here in 2014, and the wine is still fresh and beautiful, but it is growing. You can see the wine growing in the glass now with time. So you will get that, but as an industry, I doubt we will ever move back, because we see the direction for Chardonnay as it's a world direction, really, and what we were criticised for, particularly by the Europeans, and which includes the UK, because that was a market we were trying to get into, and the wines were too full-bodied, too rich, too extracted, if you like, and they kept talking about Dolly, but I don't know.
Too big and over the top.
Maybe it is
in fact,
an opportunity
you were saying about how popular they are, and the people behind you that like that style. My wife just loves it. I mean, she's an alcoholic now, but she absolutely loves that sort of wine. Loves them big and buxom. And
Buttery, not buxom.
well, you said Dolly, didn't you? But she loves that sort of wine. She loves the wood. She loves to get the splinters out of her teeth. You know, she just loves it. Because I think she cut her teeth on that, and she sold so much, she just got to get to be pushing that style of wine.
So is there an opportunity there? Why wouldn't there be something that says, okay, Chardonnay commercially for you is changing to a much lighter, more complex wine?
Well, you can determine that because the sales will tell you. The sales, if you introduce another label, which is a different style to the one you're talking about, either it will go because people will come back and buy it, it will sell, or it won't sell. So if it doesn't sell, you change your ideas and either wipe it and try something else. But it would not work in today's market.
No,
as you just said, it's got to be elegant today, not overpowering with wood. See, wood is like the sugar we get from the grape. You put a hint in there and a hint in there and see how it all works out. I mean, it is a concoction to a degree. And we are mastering that to have the most appeal. Why did Wolfgang Blass sell so much Rhine Riesling? Because he put sugar in it. That was the first time sugar had been offered to Australians in white wine. Why was that? because for the first time, at that time, we could bottle in a sterile condition, because it's very difficult to bottle wine and not have it go hazy. I'm sure there are enough people in the audience to know that this afternoon to know that our grandfathers and grandmothers, grandfathers mainly, would be reluctant to take the last bit out of the bottle. Why was that? Because wine used to have a deposit in it. Why was that? We didn't understand the technology enough to get all that crud out of solution. And it took till the 60s to develop sort of filtration and pre-bottling treatment to make wine stable. Stabilisation. And so wine would not throw a deposit. I mean, in Penfolds, when I first started, the wine was coming back from the market faster than we were sending it out because it was out of condition. No one could work out, and I'm talking when I started, which was 1960. I know that's a long time ago, but at that time, we did not understand as an industry what pH meant in terms of wine stability. We did not understand pH. Unbelievable, but true. That was in 1960. And all the wines would go out of condition because they weren't pH adjusted. And pH adjusted means making sure that you've got enough acidity in the wine to make sure that the wine doesn't throw a deposit from any number of sources. I've gone on too long.
No, mate. No, good.
Are we going on the reds?
Yes, we are. We're starting the reds now.
Let's hit the reds because I know.
Shiraz.
Shiraz.
A lovely story on, and people love the mythology of wine and the history of wine. And Shiraz, there's this beautiful story that it was discovered in a little village of Persia, outside a village of Syrah. And there were these vines growing there, which the Crusades in the 13th century, whatever, came across. They made wine out of it, and it was an outstanding success. It's a gorgeous story, but unfortunately not a word of it is true, because Shiraz actually comes from a natural cross between two different grapevines. And the joy of DNA, or the sadness of DNA, it reveals the truth in most things these days. And we were taught as winemakers in our early years that the industry began about 8000 BC, and BC doesn't mean before Chardonnay. It's an older period than that. And it was started in the Red Sea. It was developed by the Phoenicians and the Egyptians and the Greeks and the Romans and etc. And it moved all through the northern hemisphere. And as they moved, as civilization moved, I like to think that Brian and I are actually as civilizers, because being in the wine business, wherever civilization went, then grapes went in those thousands of years ago and through the last couple of thousand years. So as we developed, if you like, needing to eat and to drink, then we started growing grapevines in whatever country. So back in those early days, then the Romans worked their way up the river, the Rhone River, and there were varieties growing there hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And it seems through DNA that the Shiraz or Shiraz, or what we call Hermitage variety of Tanler Hermitage or Côte Rôtie or Crow's Hermitage, etc., all that northern Rhone area, DNA tells us that there's two other varieties which lived naturally in that area hundreds and hundreds of years ago, called Mondeuse Blanche, which is a white grape, and another grape called de Riza. And no one's ever heard of those, but they are the staple drink of that eastern side of France and up into the Swiss Alps. So somehow those vines crossed naturally. Someone was smart enough to notice this vine looks different to the one next door. I'm going to plant some more of those, take some cuttings, start making a bigger vineyard. More people noticed over hundreds and hundreds of years that this is going to work. So then the great variety Hermitage was evolved. And when our first forebears there, when they came to this country, they wanted one grape variety for sure, red variety, to be grown here, and that was Hermitage, because it was known then as the greatest red wine of the world. And in fact, it wasn't admitted, but it's still not admitted, but it was being used to supplement the in Burgundy, and also used to go across to Bordeaux to help them out in the more difficult years. So this Hermitage was a variety which had so much going for it. And when it landed here, we were the first oldest grape region, and it worked naturally for us. It produces earthy, gamey, medium-bodied styles. But like Chardonnay, we can grow it anywhere in Australia. It works in Margaret River, it works in Tasmania, it works in South Australia, as we all know, it works in Victoria, right through New South Wales, along the Alps, along the Great Divide. We've got Shiraz being grown. So it goes from earthiness and raspberry to spice and to blackberry, beautiful fruit flavours.
And there's the soil, Val.
Right. Yep.
You see, this is the darkest soil of all those bottles that you see there. So if you'd like to have a look at them after we finish this afternoon, have a look at this was the really deep red clay that we have here in the Hunter. And you all know that we have plenty of clay here in the Hunter.
Yep. Especially if you try and dig a hole.
Phil, I reckon both those Shiraz are beautiful wines.
No, Cabernet. It's Shiraz first, then the Cabernet.
Oh, this is a Cabernet.
Next door. Yeah.
Oh, well, they're both bloody beautiful wines. I tell you. Anyway, so...
Yep. So the first wine then is the Vanessa. That's in barrels and about to go into bottle. That's been in oak now for, Brett? 18 months, 19 months? 16 months, yep. So that's now been in what we call American and French oak. So it's getting the influence of what we call the vanillin character of American oak. But what it has got as a primary fruit flavour is this lovely raspberry, mulberry, those sort of red and dark fruit, berry fruit flavours. Very supple, very soft, beautiful mid-palate tannins, great length in the mid-palate. So these are wines which will age gracefully. There's not much of this wine around, so I think people are drinking it rather than giving it the chance to age gracefully, which is a good thing. But the joy of Hunter Shiraz is earthy, gamey characters like the Semillon with the toast, the nuts, will start to evolve in bottle, and you'll see that character as it matures into its years to come. But it's very hard not to drink it now.
But Vanessa Shiraz is not near its epitome.
No.
It's not near it, because if you try it, swirl it around your mouth, you'll see that it's still got quite bright tannin and acid in there. So it shows you that it's still got time under the cap to be able to develop its complexity and to be more and more interesting as time goes by. But hell, both these red wines are great wines. Hey? How old is the next one?
Next
18?
one is the 18. Now, Brett, you might like to talk about the bluegrass. This is the, if you like, the home brand of Sadler's, isn't it? It's been
Sure is.
here forever.
Yeah, so the red wine in the middle of your setting there is our 2018 Bluegrass Cabernet. So this is a ring-in to this list in the fact that the grapes for this wine are all from Langhorne Creek in South Australia, whereas the other wines we've looked at, the grapes are grown here in the Hunter Valley for the Sadler's Creek wines, whereas of course we had the Pinot Gris from the Lisa McGuigan label, which comes from Orange, I believe. Now, Langhorne Creek, if you don't know where that is, it's about an hour and 10 minutes southeast of Adelaide, not very far from McLaren Vale. They grow really good grapes. They grow turf, asparagus and Brussels sprouts. There's nothing much there other than vineyards, one pub, a supermarket / post office and a CRT farm supplier. And that's Langhorne Creek in a nutshell. They're new kids on the block. They've only been growing grapes since about the 1850s. So, you know, they're still learning.
Yes.
No, the truth in the matter is they grow awesome grapes. And we started sourcing Cabernet Sauvignon and Shiraz from that part of the country back in the mid-90s. And the reason for that is if you look back into the Hunter Valley into the 90s, really what people were pushing in cellar doors was Hunter Valley grown, Hunter Valley made. And look, let's be honest, no one really truly wants to play on a level playing field. So you decide to do something different. And here at Sadler's Creek, that something different was getting grapes from another region in South Australia and bringing those grapes here to the Hunter Valley, to this winery, and producing it into these wines here. So while the grapes are grown 2,000 kilometres away or so, the wine is made here in the barrels that you can see around us. Now, how does it differ in the winemaking process to the Hunter Valley wines? Really, the transport is the main one. And what happens is we pick the fruit in the cool of the evening in Langhorne Creek by machine. The fruit's taken to a local winery down there. They crush it and put it into a wine tanker that really looks like a big milk truck. You'd see them on the highway. They're just a big stainless steel truck. You probably pass a whole heap of them on the motorway and have no idea what they are. But a lot of the time, come March and April, they're transporting fruit or juice up the highway to regions like us here in the Hunter. And then the rest of the winemaking process is quite similar to what we do here. It's cool fermentation over an extended period of time to give lush, big, fruit-driven mouthfeel, and then into timber. Now, the main difference between this wine and most Hunter Valley Reds, in particular Shiraz, is these are predominantly American oak based wines, and as Phil suggested, that gives you that quite vanillin sort of mocha chocolate character in the wine, and that matches really well with the Langhorne Creek Cabernet, which gives you that big lush black currant and plum sort of style.
But Brett, wouldn't you agree that like the Vanessa Shiraz, this wine has got a long way to go?
Yeah, this is a bit more of a knife and fork wine though. So the Hunter Valley Shiraz is a bit more medium bodied, a little bit savoury, but has that really bright cherry and strawberry character. Considering that Vanessa Shiraz hasn't hit the bottle yet, it's still looking pretty darn good. It's really lovely and fresh and vibrant, whereas the Cabernet is a bit chunkier, a bit more gregarious. I guess if you wanted to put it in sports terms, you've got the feather or the welterweight versus the big boys in the Cabernet, because Cabernet's a much smaller berry, so there's more skin contact. It's grown in an area where it gets warm during the day but cool in the night time, so their ripening period is longer than what we're seeing here in the Hunter Valley. And then into smaller oak barrels, so into barriques, which are 225 litre barrels, which are the bulk of the size of the barrels around us, whereas in our Hunter Valley Shiraz we tend to use either some older oak, a mixture of French and American, but we also use some larger format barrels as well, so 300 litres or all the way into 500 litre barrels as well. So if you want a wine that you want to chew, I guess, that Cabernet's perfect, or put it with some heavy protein. It's pretty tasty. It's a good wine.
I think it's a lovely wine. Yes, a lovely wine, and quite some time to go before it hits its epitome. But, gee, it's a good drink now, as they both are. They're really good.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier you were talking about Wolf Blass. He's very much the person or the brand that really put Langhorne Creek as a wine-growing region on the map.
Yes.
Most people wouldn't realise, but the biggest source of fruit out of that region still goes to the Wolf Blass brand, all the way into their high-end wines. And look, let's be honest, they're pretty darn tasty because the grapes are awesome.
Yes.
Yeah. And Lindemans, in the heady days of Lindemans, that was a great source of fruit for them too.
Yes, Pyrus, and
Yep.
they all came from down Coonawarra way.
And up into the Fleurier.
Yeah, Le Fleurier, that's right. Well, I wonder, would someone like to make some comments about those two delicious reds? What about some of the other gentlemen? Sir, what about you here?
Sure.
It's called Without Notice.
It is Without Notice. I just love the Shiraz. It's just beautiful.
Yes.
Yes, there's a lot to go in the Cabernet, but it's all there waiting to happen.
It's got lovely balance. It's
Yeah.
clean as a whistle.
Yep. And I just
Yeah.
love Langhorne Creek wines, but it's
Yeah.
just,
Sorry?
I like the Langhorne Creek wines, but
Yes, yes. Well, I think we all do. But all the areas of Australia have their features,
oh yes, they do.
you know, and it's up to us as winemakers to mould those wines along the existing lines or pioneer some new styles.
Yeah.
What about some other gentlemen? What about the man here from the vintage? The vintage. He's travelled so far.
Yes.
He's really dry.
Look, I really like the Shiraz. I just like that really earthy taste, and as soon as you smell that wine, that's inviting. I want to drink that wine straight away.
Yeah.
Yes,
I really do.
yes.
The
Well,
joy-
I've got a little bit left here, so you can have that.
The great joy of Shiraz is that Australia was the only country, except for France, where its home is, its hermitage, that had this until about 1990, before any other plantings anywhere in the world. So we had a really good run before it got discovered, and it was discovered in a very famous magazine, and the lady from Texas would know it. It's called The Wine Spectator. It's an American magazine. A wine writer, the most famous probably wine writer in the
Ever.
a guy called Robert Parker, and he gave the Grange Hermitage, was called in those days, 100 out of 100, and it was unheard of anywhere in the world to get 100 out of 100, and it was for Hermitage or Shiraz, and from that point on, our sales of Shiraz went ballistic. We'd already had the Chardonnay off the ground. That was doing extremely well, particularly in the UK. But then right behind it, in a few years later, came Shiraz, or we called it Hermitage in those days, in the United States. And that was a godsend for this industry, because we had now a premium dry white, internationally recognised, and a premium dry red. So it showed the world that we weren't a one pony trick, and we could come up with two pretty significant styles of wine.
Speaking about the world, if I may, Phil, I wonder whether the lady that I attracted to Australia, did you get that? You haven't attracted anyone to Australia, Phil.
No.
You're all bullshit, Phil. The lady who came here she came here because of the McGuigan Chardonnay. Did you hear that, Phil?
McGuigan.
Chardonnay.
Yeah.
I'd like
Yeah,
to
made
ask
your
her
brother
about
find
the
out.
reds, because she's such a supporter. But I haven't got a red this time, so she won't support me.
No.
But it'll be interesting whether she supports you. I suppose McWilliams, you can get confused.
Well, my heritage goes back to Ireland, as does yours,
That's mine, yeah.
and so does McWilliams.
Exactly,
So
exactly.
it's an Irish stronghold.
And can we hear from you? What was her name, that beautiful woman?
My name is Tracy, and I actually really love the cab because I love a wine I can chew. I really want a big wine that I can chew. I like it a lot.
Yes,
But that Shiraz is going to be so good.
yes.
Oh,
Yeah, it's
Two good reds, eh?
the mid palate. What I love about that is it's silk. It's just pure velvet and silk. There's no aggressive tannins, and they will, as Brian said, they will meld in time. And when you open that, if you have any left, in 10 years' time, there'll almost be a fruit sweetness on that. You'll think, oh, that's a bit sweet, but it's not. It's just that change in the development of those tannins.
Flavour,
They
yeah.
come very silky.
Yeah.
And that's our little vineyard just up the road. Again, the source of great concern to my two young daughters
Exactly.
when they were
Exactly.
Very young.
And this is from Phil's Vanessa Shiraz, which is a name very dear to both of us.
Yeah.
And
Shout out to Ness, who's watching at the moment too, by the way.
Is she?
is she? Oh, that's good. Well,
Hi,
hello,
Ness.
Ness. Yeah. And, it's a bit like Texas tea. Texas tea, you remember Jed Clampett?
absolutely.
Yeah. Did you know Jed?
I did not know Jed.
Ah, you did. Jed Clampett. Wasn't that funny?
Yeah, the hillbillies.
Yeah, hillbillies.
Right.
Jed Clampett.
He carried a gun, didn't he?
He just carried a broom.
Brilliant.
Now we've got one wine to go, have we not? Two. Sorry about that.
So we've got the musket, the Sadler's Creek Grand Musket.
Yes.
I'm pouring the Tawny port that you got from the guys up at Drayton's. So
Thank you.
maybe we can have a chat about, we're not allowed to call it port anymore.
No.
So we're not allowed to use the word sherry anymore.
No.
So maybe we can fill the ladies and gents in on that debacle and what's Tawny, where's it come from, what's musket, etc., etc.
Well, I'll do the first bit.
You do the easy bit.
I'll do the first bit. Those buggers in Europe, because we started to use names that they thought they had ownership of, such as Champagne, Grave, all those things, they thought they had use. They thought they had exclusive use. Then a world court determined that they did. Now that upset the wine industry in this country. And so it meant that no longer could we call our beautiful port, port, because there's a place called port. And of course, when English people came here, they had the standards of what they knew back home. So when they drank port, they drank bloody port and they called it port. So when they came to Australia and made the same thing, of course it'd be natural to call it port. But no, these bastards don't like it that way. No. We're not going to have a bar of that. You are going out of business. And so they've taken all our names out. So we can't call it port anymore, or we can't call it Grave anymore, or we can't call it Champagne anymore, even though we use the same system, because we're an island down under and we're taking all their market. So what we've got to do as a nation of well-balanced, loving people is kick those Australians in the butt and say, well, you can't do that. And if you're going to sell into our market, you better invent your own names. And so that's how port, sherry, Madeira, Grave, Chablis, White Burgundy, all went out of business. And we had to change the way we were heading as marketers and change the very way in which we appealed to consumers. That was a big job. That was hard because Chablis was very popular. People knew what Chablis was. People knew what Riesling was. But we couldn't do that any longer. Because we did call it Rhine Riesling because it was from the Rhine. And they said that therefore we were intimating that this Riesling came from the Rhine River. What a lot of codswallop. Because it's not, we were never trying to copy them. I mean, our wine was too good to copy them anyway. Philly?
Well, there's nothing like a good debate. I'll take the other side of this, Brian, because...
Ooh, nice, Phil.
Realistically, I think it's about ownership of where you are and your name, and I can see the argument, obviously, of an area being used in another country is just not acceptable. We wouldn't want a brand called Pekolben starting in Europe somewhere, and we wouldn't want a brand called Coonawarra starting in Europe somewhere. So for that reason, I'm taking the opposite side of the fence, Brian.
This is very disappointing.
Yeah,
I thought we were at one, Phil, you and I.
on a lot of things we are, Brian, but on this point we're not. And I really believe that it was a release for us to lose those names which we've been marketing, and it made us stand on our own 2 feet.
Phil, if I tested the feeling of the members here tonight, I reckon you'd go down very And why shouldn't we be able to use those names?
Because
those names are world accepted.
Because we bear no...
What do you call a motorbike? Can you call a motorbike something else just because it came from Milwaukee?
And I'm afraid that's my position. And
Well,
we'll resolve it over a beer.
right now we'll take a vote. If you have won more than I have, I'm going to be very upset. Who is in favour of the frogs? Not a one. There's 2, there's 4, there's 5, there's 6.
Ribbit.
Is everyone else against? Good on you, thank you. 6:25, Phil.
Well, I'm going to keep working at it, and I'm sure in time it'll come my way.
You think I'll see the
You
benefit
will.
of it? But what do you think it happened
in the
to me
fullness of time-
when I had... Do you remember Chablis Superior? Don't. Oh, that's good. I'm glad someone did. Chablis Superior? I mean, it was a lovely name. Chablis Superior.
But it wasn't from Chablis, Ryan. But we won't...
Burgundy.
Well, what Brian
I
said, the first part of Brian's analysis was entirely correct in that these names we call generic names. And as a young industry, a growing industry, we had to, in those days, there was no control of use of trademarks and names. And it gave the consumer the confidence in they were buying a certain style of wine. They knew the wine consumers that my wonderful father loved his Burgundies, and he would often, that's how he used to try and look for wine styles as red Burgundies. And but it wasn't in those days any sort of controversy about it. But in those days, those earlier consumers knew a Burgundian flavour was softness, it was texture of velvety tannins, more strawberry, more dark cherry fruits.
Neutral.
Whereas we went to claret. It was the other side of the equation, and claret was full-bodied. It had firm tannins. It was aggressive, more weighted wine. So you said, I wasn't around in those days, but you ask people what sort of wine they are. They say we prefer a Burgundy to a claret.
You have a question, sir?
I said, and you could buy it in 2 litre or 4 litre containers.
I missed that. Sorry.
You could buy it. You could buy your favourite wine.
Yeah.
You know, your favourite Burgundy.
Yeah.
You could buy it in 4, 6, 10 litre drums.
Not in Burgundy.
Not in Burgundy, he says. That's his retort. So I'm glad you're with me.
I think by the time you got to the end of your flagon of claret, you probably needed another.
That's really good. Now, what about this? Is
Gentlemen.
Sorry. Yes. Can we just get the microphone? Thanks. Something is creeping into the market. This gentleman is asking.
No, all I was going to say is something that's creeping into the market now is calling Australian wines with the word style, you know, Burgundy style or Chablis style wines.
Yep.
Is that sort of that kind of cheating?
No, I think that
Cheating?
probably. I'm not sure if that is illegal to put on the label, but that I think is a fair description in trying to create knowledge for the consumer to get them understand that if a wine we think is made in a Chablis style direction, and they think of flint, of dryness, of quite crisp acidity. If it's made in a Burgundy, white Burgundy direction, then it's full of flavour. There'll be probably more obvious oak character there. Be richer, creamier, and it would be primary fruits of white peach, melon, that sort of thing, as against more citrus. So I'm not
That's all
sure the
bullshit, Phil.
legal ramifications, but they were the 2 words in white wine that got most Australians started in the early wine consumption. They understood what a Chablis style was, they understood what a white Burgundy style. So they looked for that within our context.
I think we need to have a question time. If anyone has any questions, as long as they don't ask you any questions about Chablis.
And I still disagree, right?
I still disagree. I know, I can't convince you. So any questions, anybody? Because, yes, there's a couple of ladies down the end there. Deborah? Couple of ladies there.
You've talked quite a bit about the global market and how that has changed and influenced Australian wines. Are there anywhere or what areas of wine where we're leaders, not followers? And if you had a look at where we are on the maturity and sophistication level of wine consumption and winemaking, how do we compare globally?
Well, I'm happy to tell you that for the last 4 years, my brother has been winemaker of the world.
Yep.
He's won the best winemaker of the world because at the International Wine and Spirit Competition, he won so many points that he's done it and done it and done it again.
And that's with multiple varieties. Yeah.
That's right. So, yeah, we are getting a lot of recognition. In years gone by, I remember the days, Phil, when Seppelts used to be the main exporter, Seppelts, and the major product they exported was fortified wine in barrels, not in drums, not in barrels. And they'd send that across to the UK and get it bottled there, and then they'd distribute it. But today, I think it's fantastic the way, and I think we should be really proud of our peers that we've been able to make the inroads basically in half a lifetime. That everybody joked about Australian wine and, it was crap and it was no good. And because Australian wine wasn't the style of wine that European people were really used to, because we were sending over there port and sherry and muscat. We weren't sending table wine, and Europe was all about table wine, basically. The only place port was made was in Portugal and Madeira. So I think we've made great inroads.
I just might add to that. You mentioned leaders, I'd like to be humble, but I won't be on this particular occasion.
Good on you, that's very nice.
That same show that Brian mentioned, London International Wine Trade Fair, which is the biggest fair of the world, and I used to go regularly with our company, and one of the most moving days for me was standing in our little stand area, doing the wine tastings, and across the road from me was a stand which had celebrating its 5,000th vintage. And it was a Georgian winery, that had done 5,000. So that made me feel pretty humble. We just got over 200, so we had to think about that. But on that same few days, the London International Wine Trade Fair, they presented wines which Neil, his brother, has done so extremely well in. And for my case, we were awarded on that show for our Lovedale Semillon, a Semillon which is 5 years old. This one's 4 years old. It was awarded the best single vineyard white wine of the world. So it was lined up against the best Chardonnays, the best Rieslings, the best Verdelhos, the best Sauvignon Blancs from anywhere in the world. Each class is judged separately. They bring out what they call the trophy winners, and then they line the trophy winners up. And that Lovedale Semillon,
and you made it.
International judges.
You made it.
Yeah, it was the best white wine, best single vineyard white wine of the world, and it was remarkable. Yeah. But so we're not followers at all. We can be seen in many times to be leaders, and because we have unique terroir and we make unique wine styles, and which are being appreciated now right throughout the world.
I think there was another lady behind.
I just wanted to agree with Brian, and I think that, sorry Phil, that the varietal styles names rather than region names, because I've grown up knowing Shiraz or Pinot Noir or particular wines that I like. When I've travelled in Europe and we've gone to a restaurant and they bring out a folder, the wine catalogue, which is like the family album, and it's massive, and you say, can we get the sommelier, because we want to know, tell us which region do we look at for Pinot Noir, or we don't know which region is which specialty wine. And I think that's probably an advantage to know which wine varietal you like, and you can then go to different regions around the world and Australia and then try different ones.
Some bright people here tonight, Phil. I think it's fantastic. You're a smart girl. God, you're lovely. Now, any other questions that we need? Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? Because we have gone an hour over time, and I think Deborah's taking a fit here. But how are we going?
I've still got some battery charges, all right.
Are you still right for
What
battery?
about our batteries?
Have you got any charges? Yeah. So anyone else with a question at all? One last question.
My question is, does Brian need a charger? Probably not.
Having the musket, yes, there's that.
Oh, the musket.
Good on you, Frank.
Come on, Serge.
Yeah, I'd like to thank both of you for presenting today, and especially one thing that stood out for me today, other than great wines and great winemakers, and that is be a leader. Be a leader. Be out there front, and the rest will follow you. Just on the point of export sales, though, because we can only consume so much in Australia.
Yes.
On the point of export sales, there's been a lot of talk lately about China. China seems to be the flavour of the month for every little thing, right? But yeah, well, no one's been the flavour for the last 6 months. But the whole thing with this, the whole of the export trade, and we know we export a lot to America, a lot back to Europe, and let's face it, we're selling ice cream to the Eskimos back to Europe. And I like the fact that we're selling a lot to the UK. Yeah, I know, we're running out of battery charger. How important is China? Is it a big deal, or it's just another thing we'll overcome?
China's about fashion. Wine's about fashion. And you buy by the label. They buy their watches by the label. They buy their wine by the label. That's why Grange has been such a success. It's not for drinking, it's really for giving. And they give it to one another to show that that person has the ultimate respect for the person who they're giving the gift to. But there is another group of drinkers, huge group of drinkers, who buy Chinese wine, but like to imagine that it's Penfolds wine or a wine that's well known, but in actual fact, with the friction that's developed between us and China, who knows what's going to happen in China, I think, with a lot of Australian products. But we were getting off the ground in China, and should those people continue to develop their taste for wine, and don't forget they only basically drink red wine, right? Because their government told them 25 years ago that red wine was great for your heart, and your heart would keep beating as long as you had red wine. But what do you think about that, Phil?
I didn't do much on the export side in Asia or China. I did a lot in Singapore, but nothing in China, so I can't remember who commented. Only then, obviously, we've got the new inspection going on, so as Brian said, Penfolds is the end-all and end-all, as you've seen, as the red wine. But one other thing, Diane is good for your heart, but the colour red is so important in an Asian context because it's about wealth and strength and happiness. And I know when I was in Taiwan many years ago selling wine, white wine was a waste of time because white, to what you didn't mention white, you should say yellow wine or golden wine, because white was about death and sadness and everything else. So red had a natural fit, and because just by its colour.
That's right. But
Good to try now.
the muscat, you going to talk about the muscat? Well, it's delicious, isn't it?
Yeah. I think this is trying to tell us to drink more.
Yeah, this is a gorgeous Australian fortified wine. We can't say it's made here because its roots comes from traditional muscat areas. It's a modest wine. It's so intense. It's got that olive green edge, that rancio character on the palate, a sort of prune-like character. It's intense, and that's been, and I let Brett go, but it's been the philosophy of Sadler's to pinpoint and identify gaps, if you like, in our grape sources, and if you want a great muscat, what do you do to make it to that intensity in the area, and similar if you want other styles of wine. So it's a pepper.
It's pretty darn tasty, I must say. So the rare muscat, the wine on the bottom right-hand side there, as Phil alluded to, this wine is not made from Hunter Valley fruit. It's a blend of material from two regions down south. So one in New South Wales being the Riverina, so around Griffith, southern central New South Wales, and then Rutherglen in northern Victoria. And they're the two key growing regions in Australia for these old school styles of wines. And what's amazing about these wines is, unlike the Semillon or the Verdelho style of wine where you pick the grapes and you send it to bottle and off to market within months. I mean, there's wines made here in the Hunter Valley where the grapes are picked in the first week of January and they're on a shop shelf in the first week of February. These styles of wines, they don't see one winemaker, they don't see two winemakers, they see generation after generation after generation. And if you go to Seppelsfield in South Australia, any person that is alive on the earth today can try their birth year of their fortified wines, because it's the aging of these wines in the barrel over an exceedingly long period of time that gives you that concentration of flavour, that intensity, that really lovely lush character. It's all about evaporation. And in this instance, the base wine in this muscat is an average age of 12 to 13 years, but that's an average, so there will be material in this that dates back probably 40 or 50 years. So we can't make all of the product, we have to go and source material from other producers in this region, and then and blend them together to make our unique blend of muscat that you can't get anywhere else. So I hope you like it. And it's a little bit of a different style to the other fortified wine that I poured for everyone, which is from around the corner up at Trademarks, and this is a tawny. So to use a term we're not allowed to use, but bugger I'll use it, this is port style. So muscat's made from muscat, and then the port style is made from a number of other red grape varieties. So, gents, you want to take it on port?
Shiraz, I think I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I think so. And listen, I think that it's been a terrific day, and for those people on the screen.
Hello. I was very keen to know about your soil bottles here that you
We did point out that you were must out the back having a drink. We did point out that this is the interesting one, because if you have a look at the colour of those soils, the Hunter Valley is much deeper than all the others, including the stuff from Langhorne Creek. Of course, there's some there from Langhorne Creek. Yeah, it's the one down the end there, Phil. It's a sandy-looking one.
Because that's a little soil from the river.
Yeah. What's the name of the river?
Angus and the Bremer.
The Bremer River. That's right, because it floods every year, doesn't it?
And that's the mouth of the Nile.
Yeah, it's like the Nile, isn't it? But I think we've had a lovely afternoon here today, and for those people on the screen, they might like to know that Sadler's Creek is where we are right at the moment, Sadler's Creek, and the best way to get here is to come to Cecil and go to the pool. At the pool, there's sets of lights. It looks quite an important, it's a T intersection. You go up that road straight ahead, and then you go past Aldi, the store, for those who don't know. It's the first, and then the first on the right, and you turn there, and then first on the right, Mount View Road, and you come up Mount View Road until you come to a turnabout. It's right there, and the turnabout, and you go straight up the hill on the Maribyrnong, and there you find Phil Ryan. Oh, sorry. Oh no, you find Saddlers Creek and then Phil Ryan. So Saddlers Creek is just up the hill from the turnabout, and it won't take you long, and you can have a wonderful afternoon having some lovely food and some bloody gorgeous wines too. Isn't that been good? So listen, can we together thank everybody, particularly Frank and Wendy and Serge, for asking us here today. It was a pleasure being part of your little tasting. And can we also thank Brett and Deborah, who's done, well, Deborah I think has done all the organising, hasn't she, Phil? And so we've had a great time. This has been something that has strengthened our friendship. I didn't know you were such a pig-headed bloke, but there you go. Nothing like an argument.
Look, gents, before
we loved having him.
Before we close off for the afternoon, from our end at Saddlers Creek, we'd just like to say thank you for taking the time to come and chat not just with us, but with the guests here this afternoon, and for those who might have looked online to see what was going on. We really do appreciate it. We realise that, you've got probably plenty of other wines at home that you can drink, and, football matches you can argue over, but thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I know the guys and girls and everyone really do appreciate it. As they say, go hard or go home, so that's why for 2017 we bottled all of our sparkling Cabernet and Magnums, so you guys have got a, big thirst for good wine, so we thought we'd say thank you.
Oh, that's lovely. That's lovely. Thank you. Thank you, Brett. Thank you. Oh, that's lovely.
So look, that concludes our tasting this afternoon. If anyone has any other questions, you're more than welcome to grab Phil or Brian and have a bit of a chin wag before they disappear. Thank you for coming along. We really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the wines, hope you enjoyed the food. If you did enjoy the food, check out the Deck Cafe at Lovedale over at Galderman Wines. The folks over there, Matt and team, will look after you if you want to go and have a tasty lunch and dinner. So thanks, Matt and crew, for that side of things. And
I'm just going to a little shout out to a few of our viewers. Sharon Cassidy had said, love seeing you, Brian, after listening to you 35 years ago. And Harry Butler said...
Was that a good... She couldn't get it out of her mind because it was a good thing, I hope.
And Harry Butler also said, Brian McGuigan is a legend in the wine industry. Brian also drives a Jeep Grand Cherokee. How good is that? Thanks, guys.
I think that's because the Jeep can get over the potholes, unlike the Maserati. All right, thanks everybody. Have an enjoyable afternoon.